We don't fuck around here.
That's awesome. I can share it to my pages. What's the page I go to?
It's
It's on YouTube. Okay.
it's on YouTube, Friday FARcast, Robert Phoenix. And by the way, we are live right now.
Oh,
We
wonderful.
were, we were pumping and streaming live. Hey, everybody, Robert Phoenix here. We got Thor down in the bottom part of the screen, Mr. Steve Mercer. And then over here in the left part of the Saturnian square, we've got Sayer G. What's going on, man?
Hey, just so happy to be here with you. I just have loved your work and you've helped me out a lot navigating my life. So, yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, this is kind of homecoming day for both you and Sharon, who's going to be on an hour too. It's very rare that my guests have also been my clients. So this is, I think, a kind of a first for this show and for me anyway. So you're a parent, right? You're a parent, householder, husband, dealing with sort of the stress of coronavirus and what's going on. How are you holding up with just the kind of the topical stuff that everybody else is going through right now?
It's a great question. I think this is quite an opportunity for us all to get intimate with fears and a lot of things that have come up for us, and to connect to the fact that this is a global experience we all now have. So there is a point of empathic merger there. But I will say that for me, I think I've been waiting for this my whole life. And, I've always had an anxiety that this was going to drop. I didn't know how, but I was preparing. For years I studied vaccines and, the sort of merger of the military and medical industrial establishments. And I think what we're seeing right now is really an international coup happening on primarily an ideological level, meaning germ theory was weaponized. And now everyone in the world, everything in the world is preempted by this sort of memeplex of, we have to be terrified by invisible particles that, by the way, happen to be part of the natural human virome. But none of that science is being spoken to. So I'm in the middle of trying to, unpack that. I'm doing a lot to try to educate around the statistics that are being, offered as, reason to be freaking out. And now we see a lot of those original projections were absolutely false, designed to manufacture fear and consent. And now there's a good number of people rising up. So I actually feel really good about where we're at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this is a really, really interesting time. And, you mentioned that you've been preparing for this moment for most of your life. And in my own way, I feel very, very similar. And I know that a lot of other people who are kind of tapped in to this nexus point of awakening are feeling something similar as well. Like we're all kind of waking up either simultaneously or we've been in training for this. And it's not just people that are, that we would consider to be part of our circle. Like, of course, the big news here in Texas is Shelley Luther, the woman who had the salon, who said, I'm going to open my salon regardless. I need to. My people that work for me cannot feed their kids. I can't feed my kids. So she went up against the state mandate, not the law, by the way, but a mandate that she was going to open her salon. Of course, she was ultimately arrested, went before a judge, and the judge, the Sanhedrin, that's what the role he was playing. He was like the Sanhedrin. And he said, I'll let you off if you apologize for being unsafe and being individualistic and not caring about other people. And she refused. And so he sentenced her to 7 days in jail with a $7,000 fine. So I thought the number 7 was quite interesting. But all of a sudden, she's got like $500,000 now, or close to it, in a GoFundMe account.
Wow.
She was basically pardoned by the governor and by the attorney general, the lieutenant governor here in Texas. And all of a sudden, this I saw her on Sean Hannity last night, very emotional. Had real, you could tell that this was nothing she'd pre-planned or done for any kind of celebrity. Yeah. Like the thing really hit her like a sonic blast. Wow. But what it did is this judge played right into this moment of awakening by forcing her to do these things. It had the reverse effect. And now somebody who's a salon owner in Dallas is part of this ever widening circle of people that are part of the awakening.
Wow. That's amazing, actually. And, happening right now during a full moon in Scorpio, this intense moment. I know that's your realm, but I will say that it's something of an ontological speciation event where you have one side, right, that is wearing masks, that is reiterating the narrative that is baseless when you look at the actual science, presumed science behind these forms of non-pharmaceutical intervention, if you will, like social distancing. And then you have the other side, which is those folks that are actually seeing it for what it is. And it's a really, in a way, concerning development that we have, this ontological chasm now between individuals that have drank the Kool-Aid and those who are seeing what's happening. In other words, okay, there are those who are frightened to death at the prospect of this invisible particle out there. And then there are those who are equally frightened at the fascist boot dropping on the necks of everyone. Right? And so that's a point of connection. And Kelly has helped me to understand this, my wife, because she does so much work here and understanding her own shadow. And ultimately, like her and I, we've been kind of freaking out and, wielding our swords and running into battle and in a way creating more divisiveness and fear. And so that's not the answer either. Even though it's scary, both sides of the equation, we have to kind of take it as an opportunity, to evolve.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting statement that you just brought to the table. A few weeks ago, I was talking about Akira Kurosawa's kind of vision of evil and heroism, right? And in the Kurosawa landscape, the villain always arrives as a kind of a set entity. Like the villain or evil does not evolve, but the hero evolves, right? So what you're saying speaks to that theorem, is that the act of heroism also includes the act of evolving and being able to rise to the occasion and to meet the challenge. So you're clearly articulating the path of the hero according to Kurosawa.
Well, I love that too, because you have this notion of the chrysalis and the, in a way, pulverization of our former self into these imaginal cells. And what a poetic, accurate description, because they become the butterfly. And it's a terrifying experience to be in this meat grinder. The transition is as real as a pregnant woman about to crown. You want to rip someone's head off, the hormones and the awareness. And we all are now in this almost ayahuasca-like ceremony where we're like throwing up and, shitting our diapers, right? Our spiritual diapers. And, ultimately, some of us who anticipated it, we've already been living in that. And there's a number of people that were somewhat elated, including Bill Gates of all people. Why was he so excited?
Oh, he's having a great old time, man.
I mean, he's not really hiding it, and I have to give them credit, because if you think about what they accomplished, this was bloodless, like, closure of the entire world. This is like equivalent to World War III as far as the info war. They totally created a prison planet out of the situation. It's like people like Alex Jones have been vindicated, in his hyperbole. But the reality is that now we can wake up together, hopefully, in a way we wouldn't have been able to otherwise.
Right. Yeah, I think that's perfectly put. The other thing that's really kind of struck me as this dynamic that's unfolding is that you have people like Fauci and Birx and of course Gates, and they're these kind of really dark high priests of science, right? They're the dark high priests. And then you have this other group that's emerging, people like yourself, Dr. Buttar, Judy Mikovits, was it Dr. Erickson from Bakersfield? And this is like the healer as warrior, right? So we have these medical practitioners, medical doctors who are forking off from being sort of the dark high priest and really going forward and moving into the fray with information and conviction and standing up against these Sith lords. And I think that's a really interesting development, because it's this kind of merger of the warrior with body consciousness and healing and protection and caring. And I think you really are kind of a tip of the spear with that. What are your thoughts around kind of what what you guys are doing in terms of coming online in this way?
Well, it's so interesting that you say that. I mean, I agree. It's like I look at people like Gates and Fauci, and I can do it with some compassion, honestly. because I feel like they're not the perfect embodiment of evil, it's very, but what they're doing is helping us to really rally our own equivalent global, sort of like, heroic energy in a way that otherwise wouldn't be true. So, but as far as what I feel needs to happen is less about, as my friend Joel Bohemia says, egos and logos, myself included, and more about people like yourself, myself, well, meaning the selfless self. Anybody can stand up now and go to a park and walk through a caution tape, and they can end up in jail, or they could be the living embodiment of the Constitution in that moment. They could be the most radical activists that ever walked the earth by simply breathing without a mask on. It's like going to the beach. I mean, they've created the consenting to the system, dropping this hammer on all of us is probably the most remarkable, horrific, and awe-inspiring event that I think has happened here, is that they were able to show us how dependent we are on the system. Well, we'll do practically anything they say and even love them for it, as they're taking away our freedom, so to speak. But we're the ones actually who are consenting, and that's what they're showing us.
Well, we're going to get into the whole topic of consent a little bit later on, but I wanted to dive into the coronavirus as sort of this theoretical biological entity. About a month ago, we had Dr. Andrew Kaufman, another warrior medic, on the show, and he really got into this idea of exosomes, electrification, toxicity, excretion of the cells, all that stuff, right? So people are trying to get educated about what a virus is and what a virus isn't. Let's throw 5G on top of that, which of course you cover on your website, and let's try to dive down into this whole corona phenomenon. What are your findings, and what are you pulling back from this, and how are you dissecting what we're dealing with from a physical level, not a political or psychological level?
Great question. So I feel like I've come to a point where I have to acknowledge that mutually exclusive narratives can be true, even though that sounds like a complete contradiction, right? Like Aristotelian logic, A cannot be not A. Like this violates that. But what I'm saying is, yes, there could be a bioweapon that was released intentionally or unintentionally in Wuhan, or there could have been a zoonosis event where there's a crossover with the wet markets with a bat, etc. Even though for millions of years these sorts of events preceded that didn't happen then. So, and there's the reality, which is that viruses are not what we have been led to believe. They have no intrinsic motive force. They're obligate parasites at best. Parasites sort of implies some agency, but they are pieces of genetic information that are able to pretty much move freely between organisms, within organisms. They are essential actually to our very species definition because they constitute the largest part of the microbiome, the virome. There's trillions of viruses that are essential in maintaining this infinitely complex homeostatic miracle of the body, which includes other germs like bacteria, fungi, etc. So once we came through the event horizon around 2000 of understanding that we're primarily germ, you look anywhere in the body, I mean, the genome, as far as protein coding genes, is probably about 11% retroviral in origin. Placenta would not exist without retroviral genes. And the idea is that so much of what we are, the mitochondria were once bacteria outside the cell, would not exist if it weren't. So how can we then allow us to think that these invisible particles, again, that happen to naturally exist in the human virome, there's over 100 coronaviruses identified, would have such a power to just kill us, this vectors of inexorable lethality, when in fact, they're essential for adapting to our environment and creating resilience within the body. So yes, it's a great idea if you're creating a viral false flag. And so the effects of toxicant exposure, biological incompatibilities with fake food, EMF exposure, causing cell death. And what you have here is the perfect fall guy. Oh, it's a virus. It's not the 5G tower we put up. It's not the fact we've been poisoning you for 20 generations. It's this thing that only we know exists with our scrying, with our priest-like abilities, and that, you have to do what we say or you're all going to die. It's just the most effective geopolitical takeover of the planet possible. And if you look at the origin of germ theory, you have to go back to the Third Reich. And there's such an interesting historical, unbroken continuity with Project Paperclip. And you go back and you look at how this was always devised to control populations, just as Foucault said. Medicine is here to control bodies. It's not to save people. It's not even really primarily to profit anymore, as you can see. They destroyed the entire global economy over this psyop. It is to control.
Yeah. Wow. That is mind-blowing and broad in its sort of capacity and scope in a kind of evil way. But so what is the consensus here now? I mean, we've got Kaufman coming out and saying, well, this could happen. We've got the guys from Bakersfield coming out and saying, well, this isn't really, working. The stats and the data, they don't seem to correlate. So what's the animal that we're really dealing? Is there a there, or is there no there, and it's really just a mind virus?
It's both, is my opinion. So in this country, it's primarily a mind virus, a media virus, a psychological operation. But it doesn't mean that they wouldn't potentially introduce a quasi-deadly virus or exosome. I think that's possible because in the sense that several years ago, they synthesized an infectious polioviral particle in a lab, and it was a big deal because it implied you can't really eradicate polio, which the Gates Foundation has been trying to say they've taken credit for years. Because you can't eradicate germs. You can't eradicate viruses. We are viruses. We are germ. And this premise that is the point, is universal vaccination against any threat, is such a powerful psychological operation. So when Fauci published in the New England Journal of Medicine less than a month ago, his editorial looking at the stats for case fatality rates with coronavirus at that time, it was amazing. He admitted that it is likely it's about 0.1%, which is about what a seasonal flu is. He said it himself. This is the very man that was, proclaiming, according to the false estimates of the Imperial College, March 14th, before they shut the country down, because they said Trump had to do it or everyone's going to die, 2.2 million people. He himself in this journal said that this is not true. And you can't make this stuff up. People who suck on the teeth of CNN or ABC or wherever they get their mainstream media, okay? That is the problem, because that is how they took over this country and the world, but primarily this country.
Right. Yeah. I think the polio crisis or the polio epidemic, theoretically in the 40s and the early 50s, has a lot of interesting clues for the time that we're in now. And I'm not an expert on the conditions that led up to polio, but there seems to be a very strong link between spraying DDT on crops and the damage that DDT was doing to people from a cellular level, and this occurrence of so-called polio. Have you gleaned any insider information by going down the polio rabbit hole? And if so, what are the correlations between then and now?
It's a great question. Yes, absolutely. There was the introduction of DDT. It was good for you, right? They marketed it. They would spray it on children, and they didn't realize so much later it was actually quite deadly. So at the time, there were cases of individuals exhibiting what seemed like conventional polio-induced nerve death when it was in fact poisoning. And at the same time, you had basically a scaling down of infectious diseases of this order because of the improvements in sanitation, hygiene, nutrition, etc. So, and there was a reclassification of certain polio-like symptoms as new novel diseases in a way to cover up and make it seem as if the vaccines were doing a better job than they were, if at all. In fact, they were inducing, I believe, polio because they were live polio vaccines. So it's complex, but as far as what you're pointing out, yes, there's always an environmental, medical context, which needs to be looked at. And the basis of gene-based and germ-based views is to completely obviate, obfuscate the primary conditions, which are nutrition, environmental factors, spiritual, emotional, geopolitical, EMF related, that we all know causes disease. And it's meant to cover that up. Oh, it's in your genes. Oh, it's a new novel virus that you need to take this vaccine for, etc. This is basically, modern medicine has become a psychological operation. It is not any longer validated by the new biology and the new physics. So I think that's really why this is so egregious, because those who've taken, just even a cursory look at the literature can see that the emperor wears no clothes. There's actually nothing to base this on other than one thing, which Andrew and I have talked about, is that what can look like toxicant exposure, infectious disease can be misleading, because exosomes can induce the symptoms of toxicant exposure that look very much like flu or viral infection in those who are exposed. And it's a means to protect individuals within a species. It's a way of communicating information to encourage detoxification. And so it looks like a particle here that's a virus went here and caused disease. But it's like, I can get deeper into it. I have in another talk, but it's basically saying, yes, there appears to be basic infection when in fact it's a xenohermetic protective response related to toxicant and EMF exposure and even psychogenic induced illness. Because if you believe that you're going to die, you believe a particle's infected you, the power of the mind and body and spirit, and I don't need to tell you this, is so profound that you could literally die just from believing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell people about why Bill Gates's idea for his specific vaccine is so dangerous?
Oh, such a great question. Well, first of all, it takes about a decade normally to properly create a vaccine as far as proving efficacy and safety. And then often there's post-marketing surveillance, which shows later that, at best, only 1% of the adverse effects are even being acknowledged. So vaccines have a very bloody, devastating history, which is represented by the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund, enacted through Congress in 1986, which has paid out over $4 billion to families who have had dead or irreversibly injured children from vaccines. So it's not a conspiracy theory to point that out. It's just the government saying that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. So when it comes to Gates, what he's done is invest in the very category of experimental vaccine that is known as transhumanistic, because it requires that we alter the structure and function of either the RNA systems in the body or the DNA. Now, it was believed for some time by focusing on RNA that the changes wouldn't be transmitted down the progeny line. That's not true. Unfortunately, we know now through exosomes that somatic cells can communicate directly to germline cells, and therefore changes in our body cells right now from any exposure can be passed on forever down the line. So what essentially is being done is, and he literally said this in Gates' notes a week ago, is that your body will be turned into a vaccine manufacturing plant. So we're talking about something so egregious and is such a clear violation of our species that you can't make this stuff up.
Right. That's like, so the vaccine theoretically will go into the RNA and wind up producing an exosome crisis for as long as you're alive, right? I mean, this is really what's going to happen.
Oh, well, so there's so many ways of looking at this. Initially, they tried to produce vaccines from cancer cells and realized there could be an oncogenic factor. So they took animal cells instead, which is what Mikovits pointed out recently in all her work. Animal cells, though, happen to have oncogenic viral components and or DNA. So when you make vaccines that way, they surreptitiously go into your vaccine. That's why Paul Offit's Rototech, which he has a patent on, even though he's supposedly an expert on the safety of these vaccines, a huge conflict of interest, contains at least 2 simian retroviruses, which have probably infected millions just in that one vaccine. So then they decided, that's unsafe. So let's try to attenuate that, destroy or weaken the virus. And that still doesn't work, obviously. So then they created another kind called capsid surface antigen, where they're not taking the whole virus or germ, and they're just taking a little piece to try to trick the body. That caused even more side effects and deaths, et cetera. So they're like, forget that. Now they're going to try to alter the DNA or RNA within the body which you can't do that with. You tug on a little string, and it's like, what is it, Indira's web? It's like every string in the universe is tugged. They don't get it. We are open access, horizontally information transferring entities, and they are playing God, of course, as usual, and they may the unintended or the intended effect may be to forever change us in a way that could be potentially fatal, honestly. And in fact, that's the whole key, right? Is that when you look at the backstory of Gates and the Gates Foundation and his father being on the board of Planned Parenthood, and you look at some of the statements he's made from TED Talk to interviews about depopulation, and you look at evidence that they put in human gonadotropin hormone within vaccines so that it would create anti-fertility effects. This is part of an agenda that is not about saving lives, obviously. In fact, it targets reproduction. That's why he funded GMO terminator seeds, for example, that would destroy an ability of a plant to reproduce so they could control life. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we are being fed shadow, a very, very dark manifestation of the shadow. And this is part of the graduation process, right? I mean, this is when, theoretically you get to a certain stage and you got to take on the master, right? You've got to take on the master. You've got to take on the dark master in order to kind of get through this and then get to the next level. And we're entering the octagon right now. Have you and Kelly suffered any censorship through YouTube with any of your videos?
Interestingly, not yet, but we've definitely dealt with deplatforming and censorship. She more on Instagram, me more on Pinterest and Google. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are seeing this right now, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. You ever get into Sri Aurobindo at all? Do you know that guy?
Sri, did you say?
Aurobindo. He was a guru right around the same time as Yogananda.
Oh.
So Aurobindo was really into the body and particularly like the cells and cellular structure. And he had a student called Sat Prem, who also did a lot. That might be an interesting kind of vector for you and other people who are interested in the convergence of kind of the transcendental tradition and the deep dive into the body. And it might provide us with some interesting ideas and talking points on the spiritual theater of the body. Well, yeah.
Well, you've given me some thoughts there because, I always like to see how when I project the shadow and I think about how nefarious Gates might be, and I think more about how I might be participating in those things in my own life, the things I support, the things I buy. If they say I shop from Amazon, I can't complain when they're trying to vaccinate me on my doorstep because, they fund the CDC Foundation. They're, a part of this whole thing. But I think that maybe people like Gates feel that they're acting in a transcendent way, and that's what transhumanism is. And they're, paternalistically trying to save us from ourselves. And I think, that's something to look at. But anyway, just thought.
I want to give people a tour of your website. It's a really incredible compendium of health and articles surrounding health. So Sayer's got a new book out called Regenerate, Unlocking Your Body's Radical Resilience Through the New Biology, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But there's so much more. All these articles on grapeseed, reducing blood pressure, oligosaccharides, and why we need to add them. It just goes on and on. There's stuff around 5G, Taiwan giving us a very different kind of model to deal with coronavirus or whatever this thing is. The benefits of coffee. I really like that one because I
like coffee too.
So this is a really great resource. If you haven't discovered his website, you've got to check this out. So one of the things we were going to talk about a little bit is the whole 5G thing.
Yes.
And it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I know a lot of other health practitioners, and people need to understand this is not going to just be 5G. It'll be 6G. It'll be 7G. They've got all these other rollouts for this technology. But let's start here. And Sayer, what are your kind of initial thoughts, and how do you break this new radical entity that's been introduced into our environment?
Yeah, so we're running a free summit that has 40 of the best, experts in terms of PhD scientists, et cetera. on 5G, because I got into this because of my friend Josh Del Sol, who did the documentary Take Back Your Power on smart meters. And he helped me understand that because, data is more valuable than oil right now, which incidentally, the Rockefellers just eschewed all their holdings last week, because I think there's an acknowledgement of where we're moving in this moment. It's about data and surveillance, et cetera, is that's what it's about. Why is it valuable that they put these devices in our home to measure our behaviors, et cetera? It's because that's the new model. It's total, complete, surveillance of everything and everyone to control, just like we're seeing in China. And in order to execute that, we need higher bandwidth. So it's not for streaming videos. It's so that they can create the Internet of Things, tie every single piece of equipment together so nothing you do or say anymore is private or won't be quantified and then in some way used to control your behavior or the behavior of others. So 5G, of course, means fifth generation, but when we talk about it, for the most part, I do not believe they've yet rolled out widespread the millimeter wavelength. So about 10 gigahertz all the way up to 300. But that's what you're saying. They're going to keep evolving it theoretically until they can max that out. And when you start getting around 60 gigahertz, and you'd say 30, but 60, that's around the ranges that the Defense Department created their active denial systems around, which basically enable them to take these military-like installations. You can see them beamform and literally burn, the crowd. They say it just goes, on the surface of the skin, but there's antenna-like structures in the sweat ducts and pores. So it affects everything. And they could theoretically, with enough power density, kill someone with it. Mm-hmm. So the point is this is an incredible way to set up a system for total surveillance and then control of everybody remotely, even peering into our houses, et cetera, as well as even the unfortunate reality that because of programs like MKUltra, you can see them using it for mass control of the brain and the nervous system. And that's even deeper concern.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, we haven't seen the widespread application of the MIMOs, which are the millimeter antennas, and they have to be very close together because 5G does not have a long signal range. So I think that this next decade is about the application, the construction, and the distribution of the MIMOs. But they're right now they're getting into sort of centralized either groups or locations like schools. I think when they open schools back up, and they likely will, schools will be wired with 5G. It's going to happen, right? Stadiums all across the country. Nobody's using stadiums now. Why? They're going to put 5G into the stadiums. So we're seeing the rollout, but it's happening in these clusters, sort of the cluster effect. And but people need to become aware of 5G, and we're flying over the target because anything 5G related gets booted off of YouTube.
Yeah, that was really alarming because when we came up with this summit last year, it was one of the more, as far as Google search trends scaling topics, even more than vaccines, which I was surprised. But now it just, went to the roof at the moment that you can't say it because, your channel will get banned or they'll censor you. So it's an indication of how important this is to their agenda.
So when is this summit coming up and how do people attend that?
Yeah, so it's June 1st. That starts 7 days. And there's an encore. And it's just the 5G summit.com. And when you register, you get access to 4 of the most amazing talks right away. It's really powerful. It gets deep into the technocratic agenda, the health risks, and what you can do. This is a worldwide call to action because we've embedded a tool in it that enables you to, within a matter of a couple clicks, access your local decision maker, elected official, and send a very strong message that you do not consent to this ubiquitous exposure that no one has studied for safety within the industry. But we have thousands of studies outside the industry that indicate clear signals of harm and worse.
Is there a sign-up page on your website right now, or is that going to come?
I think there's probably a pop-up that leads there, but otherwise it's just the 5gsummit.com, and it's really an incredible event, I have to say.
Okay, I'll make sure I leave a link in the show page so people can attend that. Let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the vaccine itself, the chip, mark of the beast. A lot of people are well aware of the perils of the vaccine. People are trying to figure out how they're going to deal with it. How can they not consent? Is there legal recourse? And I know you and Kelly have been on this front for a long time now. So we're coming up to that Maginot line. What can you share with people as to how they can legally or even spiritually begin to protect themselves around this vaccine?
That's a great question. So as far as right this moment, I think it's pretty clear that because of what Gates has been communicating, and it's just amazing to me this man has any relevance or gets any airtime because he has no background in health in any form. It's really that he's determining global health policy and saying the lockdown shouldn't end until the vaccine's available in 18 months that he's invested in. And the recommendations coming from the WHO, he's the number one funder now because the United States backed out. I was shocked that Trump seemingly had the power to do that. Today it was announced that we will not participate in a universal COVID vaccine program either because of this withdrawal. So there's indication that this agenda, as far as the United States, that we have something of a growing force field that's saying no. When Mike Ryan, who's director of emergencies programming for the WHO, said that they will literally come to our home and take our children and family away with these mandatory invasive tests, including temperatures, that was a chilling statement. That if people didn't see that, they should know that they declared what they're intending to do, which is the complete destruction of any protection we have to claim that our children are our own. And by the way, I've been doing this for a long time now. I have a 501c4 that I am a supporter of it's called standsforhealthfreedom.com. And it exists simply to help people locally and nationally know what their rights are, take action and say no to mandatory vaccines or stripping of exemptions. And that's really what this is about, is that no one has, we have protection because we have the Constitution. So irregardless of even emergency health executive orders, the Constitution exists as a protection against what are fundamentally, completely unethical, and I would claim they are illegal orders. Because right now in the state of Florida and other states, their statute says they can literally seize your body fluids, which means they could just take your blood test without your consent. They can vaccinate you, they can quarantine you, they can isolate you. And if you look at the history of this, by the way, it goes back to the Model States Health Emergencies Powers Act, was written in 2001, it was September, I believe, in Georgia. I think it was Georgetown University. And they basically set up a template for all the states, and I think over 30 of them have implemented these measures that basically take away your right to exempt you from these mandatory vaccines in times of health emergencies. So they were working on it for 20-something years, and here we are. They've written it into the law, and we're now seeing that we have to stand up for our rights because they will try to force tests, they will try to force isolate, quarantine, and vaccinate and medicate. And by the way, in the case of the COVID debacle, what people need to know most of all is they do not require from the World Health Organization to the US Vital Statistics Agency that any virus be tested for a coroner or any medical personnel to write COVID death on a death certificate. They only have to suspect. And that is just a fatal flaw in this entire fear-based inflation of these numbers. This is completely a fraud if they're not even requiring objective verification. And it is a travesty, if not far worse, that any organization would be considered news to be able to report these stats as if they're validated. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, they've been ginning the stats. That's pretty clear. A lot of people coming out who have had loved ones die, and they said they were diagnosed with, COVID-19. It's like, well, hold on a second. They had cancer. and they expired, and this is not true. And I've read multiple cases. And then I talked about a story that I picked up on here in local radio out of San Antonio. And this woman called into the local talk show, and she did a telemedicine thing with her doctor. Her son has special needs. And the son was not part of the call. It was just her and the doctor. And she described the son's symptoms. And the doctor said, well, it sounds like he's got a sinus infection. So we'll prescribe some antibiotics or whatever, right? Yeah. So she's like, okay. Then she gets the report back, and she sees on the reports possible COVID-19 infection under investigation. Mm-hmm. And she's like, what? You know, they never talked about it during the telemedicine conference, but now all of a sudden it's a statistic and it counts against San Antonio. Right?
Yes. This is exactly what I was trying to communicate earlier, is that instead of looking at what they call comorbidities, where like say in Italy, they found that 99% of those who died already had pre-existing fatal chronic conditions that they were already being treated for, that half of them had 3 chronic conditions, and the average age of death was 6, and the average lifespan is 82. So these people, and so to say a particle in their body killed them when they were already sick and they were already aged is absurd. And to shut the entire world down over that, that is what is arguably the most criminal of all act that occurred. That it was a controlled demolition of the entire socioeconomic infrastructure and superstructure of the planet. And I'm still amazed that they accomplished this.
Well, there's a lot of complicity at very high levels that allow that narrative to be pushed forward. So I just wanted to give people a quick shot at Stand for Health Freedom right here. So this, if you want to get more informed about vaccines, the danger of vaccines, where your state might be in terms of vaccination, what your rights might be, they can sign up for this on your website. Is that correct, Sarah?
Yeah, and I could just tell you too that what we are doing at Stand for Health Freedom is, if you're a pro-vaccine person, guess what? We support you too, because it's about the freedom of choice and informed consent. So that's one thing, is that people love to brand organizations like ours as anti-vax, when that's actually not what we're saying, because we're not here to take away a parent's choice. We're here to affirm that's a God-given right and responsibility, and the Constitution protects it. And it's the most basic human intuition that they should not be removing the age of consent to vaccinate down to age 9. There's a District of Columbia bill that right now is trying to do that. The American Pediatrics Association released their statement that they think the age of consent should be 12. This is a deadly intervention. Every insert says you can die from it, not to mention a litany of chronic diseases. And so for them to take away a parent's right and responsibility, there's something extremely sick and implicit about that. So call it parentectomy, call it Saturn eating his own children, right? Because we're Pluto-Saturn conjunction, right? That's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently if a 9-year-old can consent to an overage lover, then I guess consenting to their own vaccine is really just part of the overall package. That's the bonus part of the package.
That's it.
Yeah. And we can actually spend a lot of time on that, which we don't have. But the time that we do have left, I'd like to talk just a little bit about how people can stay healthy, right? We want to promote health. We want to promote immunity. And that's a really big part of your work as well, particularly your new book. So maybe for the next 5 or 10 minutes, we could just go down that chute and share with people what they can do to stay healthy and keep their body, mind, spirit online.
Beautiful. Well, one is to orient ourselves in the way that, say, Sweden did, where they intended for their healthy, law-abiding citizens to go ahead and experience getting COVID and then developing herd immunity, if you will. The whole notion of vaccine-induced herd immunity was co-opted from the natural observation that when there is a transfer of genetic information, be it viral or exosomal, that some become resilient for the rest of their life because of that challenge. And so that's really part of what we need to understand here, is that if you think about MMR vaccine, right? are there all these multiple boosters? Because you can't reproduce the lifelong immunity that our grandparents, for example, and some of our parents still have from having been challenged naturally with these relatively benign infectious challenges. And so to recontextualize what infection is, it's actually a way to confer immunological homeostasis and resilience. Now, if anyone wants to go deep into that topic, go to YouTube and type in mammalian virome and look at this NIH lecture by Skip Virgin. It will blow your mind to find out that some of these deadly viruses that are always in us, like say Epstein-Barr, without them, we would end up developing severe infections and or cancers, and that everything we thought about, I mean, look at measles, they use as a treatment to fight cancer, it's oncolytic, is wrong. So starting with the premise that when we build natural immunity, we're not just trying to build a better, more natural way to fight viruses. It's more to better understand that our body's default state is actually infinitely resilient, and that it's a miracle that you and I wake up in such great form as we do every day, given the lifetime of exposure we've had to novel, intensely toxic substances and electromagnetic wavelengths. This is the Anthropocene, and we're still relatively alive. So I see it kind of in a different way, which is to rather acknowledge, it's almost like in Zen, we always already are enlightened. If we can simply remove the interference and just naturally, gently detoxify, which is a word that unfortunately has been associated with quackery, when it is the fundamental method that we heal, is to remove the interference, get the gunk out of our body, and we will come back into balance and a sense of wellness naturally. Then when we look at food, because that's a big part of my book, we start to understand that food is information. And let's think about how plants that produce fruits, known as angiosperms or the flowering plants, 70% of our world's food supply depends on them still. They develop a strategy with us. Oh, you're going to help disperse our seed. We're not going to use the wind. And we're going to give you this amazing just elixir of life called fruit, for example. And the reality is that we now know that it contains exosomes, which have microRNAs, which are known to potentially control most of our gene expression, meaning that certain foods we need to be healthy. And by transitioning to this fake modern diet, we have guaranteed that our genetic infrastructure is going to fall apart. So when we look at cancer, it's not a deficiency of radiation and chemo, but it is a deficiency of fruits and vegetables and berries and plants. So when we start to contextualize it, it's not that food's just fuel. It's not that food's just building blocks for our body machine, but it's information. And the quality of the food depends entirely on the health of the soil and actually the germs that are within them. It's like this eureka moment. And we understand that we cannot really fully heal without certain healing of the biosphere and vice versa. So that's a little bit of a taste of one of the concepts in the book.
Good. Anything else you want to share with people, like attitude, belief, depressurizing from everyday stress?
I think that's the key. I mean, I've learned because of my relationship with my wife that for everything I think I know and feel, if I'm not living in my heart, which is actually quite often, because we traffic in these spaces, and there's a certain warrior archetype that comes out that I just want to run head first into the cannon fire, and it's not going to work really long term. Is that's I think how we get through this together. It's not through knowing more or trying harder, because I'm doing that all the time, and honestly, I don't think it's really having the effect I want. I think it is by living here and finding our commonality. If I can find what's common, even in what I perceive to be my enemy, and I can help humanize and maybe even give them the benefit of the doubt so that they can be redeemed, that would be beautiful. I don't want to give up hope of that, and I'm prepared to fight, tooth and nail. If someone tries to do something to me or those I love, that is obviously a violation of my basic human rights,
Yeah. Right on. Well, let's bring Steve in for a minute here, because we've got Sharon waiting in the wings, and let's just see if Steve has anything that he wants to share or have any insight into our conversation.
Hey, here I am. You got me?
Yep.
Yeah, Jennifer Fitzgerald asked, what is Sayer G's recommendation for one thing we can easily do to improve our overall health?
It's a great question. I love that. They go all over the place. So the one thing you can do, this is in the book actually, is eat raw food of some kind with each meal. If you can do that, and it's not because I'm a raw foodist or that I believe the enzymes are necessarily, going to save your life or whatever. It's more that I've come to understand that there are quasi-immortal cells called meristematic cells in raw plant matter that confer a type of energy and information that I feel can literally revive and regenerate the entire body. And one of the suggestions I have is if you eat an organic apple instead of a full meal and start getting more into a relationship with food where you're being nourished by that light energy, it becomes like a meditation, and you simplify the normal kind of mindless ways that we eat and self-medicate. And that to me is another thing. And sometimes I suggest people try for a day. Organic apples to reset your mind, your body. And I think you will feel quite amazing, and you won't be hungry because you can eat as many apples as you want. And you're not going to eat, you're not really hungry, you'll find, if you don't want to eat another apple, but you'll get to a point where, okay, I'm hungry again, and you'll eat that apple. And that's actually a very interesting experiment that I've benefited profoundly from.
Good. Kind of less is more. I've heard that the more you eat, the hungrier you get. And if you fast a little bit and then say you do eat that one organic apple, then you can really feel, like you said, you get in touch with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's great. That's great advice.
Cool.
And also being consistent on a daily, daily practice or routine or ritual almost.
Yes.
An apple a day.
Things you do consistently.
It does. It does.
Spouts you away.
Yeah, I mean, in post-Chernobyl, they saved tens of thousands of children from radiation poisoning and death from using apple pectin, and that's just one component of apples. You could probably talk a couple hours about their benefits. They're so unique and amazing. So, yeah, there's a lot of hidden additional benefits there that you don't. Yeah.
Good.
Well, Sayer G, I'm glad you're on the planet right now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
It was an honor. Thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool.
And hopefully we'll get you back on. I know you're super busy, but we'll get you back on. And as this vaccine thing seems to accelerate, yes, we got to get you back on. And
I would love to. Yeah, no, I love this. It's been great for sure.
Okay, well, take good care of yourself. All right.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the work you're doing. Okay.
All right. Bye for now. Sayer G. How about that, man?
Oh, good. All right.
Wasn't that, come on back on here, Steve. Wasn't that great?
Yeah, that was wonderful. And I haven't heard him a lot either, but he's definitely one of the good guys.
I think he's a Libra, like you, right? So you
told me about him before.
Yeah, he was balancing, right? He was balancing this idea that, Gates is Darth Vader is kind of part of us in some ways, right. and I really like that. That was great.
Yeah, that's one aspect of this. I'm still in that, protective mode, in the physical, just in case it gets bad, you still have keep that in mind, but you come from those higher levels and do what you can on the spiritual levels to get through this in the best way.
Yeah. I'm still in kind of Clint Eastwood mode with Gates right now. I haven't gotten to the Bodhidharma of Gates. Speaking of Bodhidharma and speaking of energy and the reconciliation of opposites and alchemy, let's bring Sharon on. She's hanging out here in the foyer, and there she is. Let's unmute her, and she should be good to go here. And we're going to ask her to start some video. There she is. Look at that. Look how bright and sunny she is. Can you give us a little level there, Sharon?
Okay, here we are.
There you are.
What a joy.
Hey, did you? Yeah, thanks for being here. So did you check in with some of Sayer's information there?
Oh yeah, some of it, yes.
Yeah. Are you familiar with him at all by any chance?
No,
Yeah.
no, I'm not.
Oh, good.
Well, it
Steve,
was
say hello to
very
Sharon. Say hi to Sharon, Steve.
Hi, Sharon. Nice to meet you.
pleasure.
Okay, really looking forward to this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm always here to bring beauty, joy, upliftment
Yeah.
through all the various traditions and teachings that I've learned and embodied and taught throughout these many years of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
So why don't we get into? Why don't we dive in, Steve? We'll see you at the end of the interview,
Okay.
and let's get to know Sharon a little bit and get up to speed with her and her work. And official welcome to the show. I got to know you through. I knew about you before I knew Jay. So I knew about you. I'd seen you kind of around. I'd seen your name on the internet. I knew that you were a filmmaker. I did not know you were connected to Jay, but obviously I got to know Jay through Gaia, and then you and I connected sort of post Gaia. So bringing the circle, making the circle complete here. So that's how I got to know you, was through your husband, Jay Widener. But then you have your own, creative, sort of like, treasure trove of content and experience as a filmmaker and a Qi Gong practitioner. And, I did a search. I was like, all these videos of you popped up and you're on all these shows and all these networks. And so I'm really psyched to be able to talk with you and tap into, your mind share here. So maybe you give people a little bit of a background and so who you are and how you became a documentarian and interested in Qi Gong and energy fields. So let's dive into Sharon here a little bit.
Let's see. I would say I started in my work in this life, which has to do with the performing arts and the healing arts, very young. I was thrown into preparing for Broadway. My mother was one of these kind of stage mothers.
Oh, wow.
But took me to ballet and theater training and music conservatories from 3 years old. And in those traditions, I learned very early about reading energy, about how to look at people and see their energy fields and see how they held their bodies and also their emotional expression, their sadness, their joy,
right,
their fear.
Yeah.
And that training went on. I was a Fulbright senior research scholar and awarded let's see, what was it called? From the American Institute of Indian Studies, a fellowship to go to India and live with one of the great dancers and tantrikas of India, which is a very rare privilege to be able, for a woman especially, to live with a female living master who was like a treasure of India. And that shifted me. I went deep into Tantra, into yoga. I mean, I'd already started yoga way before that, but to have that kind of connection, 8 hours a day of dancing and embodying in this.
And you got a scholarship for this? You got a scholarship?
Yeah, I had two of them. One was American Institute of Indian Studies and Smithsonian, and the other one was the Fulbright Senior Research Fellowship that is usually given to PhDs, but because I was in the arts, master's degree is fine. And I had already been living in New York City, dancing, studying with some of the great modern dancers. But what was so interesting to me was that when I got to New York, I was dancing with people from all over the world. So I always loved rhythm. And rhythm and mathematics are very connected, especially if you know the Indian tradition.
Oh, yeah.
So, but not only that, what was so amazing was I was learning to feel and embody the rhythms and the stories of all these different world traditions. And so that has been a major part of my work. I then went on and reconstructed the music, dance, and ritual from the temples of Egypt. We're singing the hieroglyphs And I'd been involved I'd studied craniosacral therapy, and I worked with Robert Masters and Jean Houston, one-to-one. I've been very fortunate that way, learning what was called the psychophysical method of neurosensory.
Now, this Robert Masters, is this the Robert Augustus Masters? Is it that guy, or is that somebody else?
No, this is the man that wrote Mind Games. Remember John Lennon's song?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
So he was also an Egyptologist.
Mm-hmm.
So we had this extraordinary connection where we would go together into these trance states, kind of hypnotic. I mean, we had studied, he was a major hypnotist. He'd worked with Milton Erickson, the great father of hypnosis.
Yeah.
So all this we worked one-to-one. So I've been very fortunate, with my teacher, Sitara Devi in India, and then with Robert, it was one-to-one. And that's where I really learned this whole technique for healing, going deep, deep, deep into the tissues, learning how to free your emotional body, and your thoughts, but also heal deep wounds, and not only physical wounds, like if you had, whiplash or something. These simple exercises that bring your consciousness deep into the tissue, into the bones, and really help you free it would be your neck.
Right.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit about this today, as we get into some of Sharon's video material. So what time frame were you in India? When was this?
80s, 83 to 88.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And so in a lot of ways, you have been almost a participant in a mystery school of life from very early on. And that's what it feels like to me.
Oh, for sure. Because not only, even as a dancer, I had partners from Lebanon. I had partners from Haiti, from India. And so we were dancing. We had a show in the 90s. My dance partner, Ramzi El Edlabi, and we danced and taught in schools throughout New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Virginia, like thousands of them, bringing world dance and culture music to students and uplifting them. Really, because kids, they love to embody. And also what was really interesting was because we were using story and myth, we were able to bring in concepts and embodiments like meditation, where, sometimes it's like, oh, you can't bring those spiritual things in, but because it was in the context of a story. Now, all this time from 78, I had been involved in video. I started in 78. I choreographed music videos, world music videos. I had a lot of productions in which I used video as part of it. I had fellowships for that during that period. And then in 96, I met Jay.
Okay. So I want to ask you about the Jay piece. All right. I want to ask you about that. Did you ever cross paths with Susan Dahim in New York? The Persian singer. She's a friend of mine.
I love Persian music. I'm actually using it.
You would like her material a lot. You would have a lot in common with Susan, by the way, I think. So I want to ask you about Jay. How did you and Jay meet?
I was living in New York, dancing. A friend introduced me to Richard Hoagland.
Okay. Oh yes, the partnership.
The face on Mars, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it was very interesting because I had worked with a man named Boris Said. Boris was the producer of The Mystery of the Sphinx, John Anthony West's work.
Oh yeah, right. Great video, by the way. And I interviewed wonderful. John. What a gentleman! I love that guy. He was great.
A real scholar.
Yeah.
A real heartfelt person.
Yeah.
So Boris, I was a real scholar type. So. Besides being a dancer. So Boris asked me to work with him. At that point, he had just come off of working on Mystery of the Sphinx, and he was writing a proposal for a series. So this is 92, a series on the mystery of. And so I was the scholar and really writing all of the deep teachings. It was a treatment, so we had to distill. And but also, I was really performing then. mean, I was one of the first. I don't know if people have seen these performances with these big golden wings, like Isis. And so I was doing that kind of perform, and he was just really taken with it. So he asked me to come visit because Graham Hancock and his wife Samta were coming that weekend to discuss going on a tour to England. And so I met them, and Samta's from Sri Lanka. Oh, at that point I was Indian. My name was Sahara Devi. I dressed in saris. I was total embodiment of India. And so we connected very deeply immediately. And then Richard, he told me about this guy. He said, "You've got to meet this friend of mine, Jay Widener. He's the topmost authority on ISIS." And I'm like, yeah, because I'm one of these people that when I pursue something,
you're
it's
into
just,
it. Yeah.
I become very passionate. So I was performing in Seattle, and I called, Jay was living there, and I called him. And he was like, "Oh, okay, we'll come and meet. I'll come and meet you." And then when it was time, he called and said, "Oh no, my cats are sick." And I'm like, okay, who's this stuffy professor? Who is this guy? So now we'll fast forward. Now Richard and Graham Hancock and Robert Gavall, they had just written these books on Egypt. They asked me to come, and my dance partner, with them to perform. They wanted us to show how the myths and symbols had been encoded into the art of Egypt. And so I walk into this hotel, and there is this guy. I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and it was really love at first sight. That was Jay.
That was Jay. Because I was going to ask you, you read energy, you read people. What was your energetic read of Jay when you first met him?
Well, I can tell you mostly when we went out to dinner that night. Because what I like to do, I always like to do, is sort of sit on the outside of the group so I can observe what's going on. And it was like Jay was this major force. I mean, he's an extraordinary storyteller.
He's a great storyteller, and he has a lot of charisma.
Oh, yes. And so I watched as everyone in the group was just drawn to him, right?
Yeah.
And so as the tour went on, we went to Glastonbury and other places. It was Jay and Richard and I were just hanging out together, and we started talking, Jay and I, about the similarities of Tantra, Tibetan and Hindu Tantra, and alchemy. And the similarities were so incredible. And we were it was just like, kismet or something.
Yeah.
And so that's how it began. And then, so that was 96. By 97, I had moved to Boulder. He had just gone to work for Gaia. I mean, Gaiam, yes. And so I moved to Boulder, and he had all this background in film, and I had it in dance and music video. And so our dream was to start a company together. So in 2000, we began Sacred Mysteries.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is great because now you're completing the circle with my relationship with Jay. From this perspective, you and I have obviously had time, offline in this way, but now it's full circle here in this medium. I wanted to show people and thanks for sharing that. I wanted to show people some of your work. You've got a new article that's out right now. So I want to see if I can pull this down here. Give me one sec. I'm going to have to, what do we have? Is it here? Let me see. This is the Say or G stuff. Give me one sec, Sharon. I know I had it up here. Let me get rid of that. Why don't you sort of do a bit of an intro here on your latest article while I dig it up?
Well, we'll go later into my passion for Qi Gong, Tai Chi, traditional Chinese medicine. I spent the last 2 years, I hosted and produced what's called the Qi Gong Global Summit for the Shift Network. And in that, let's see, I did 50 interviews between the 2 years and really brought Qigong to them. And then they brought it out to a global audience. And recently they asked me to write an article about my perspective on what was happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the article is about.
There it is. So reflections upon the global pandemic. We'll get into the first paragraph here. Our world, our future, all that we have known is being altered right now, all around us. Everything that we are, the essential nature of society, our hopes and dreams are undergoing substantial, radical alteration. At the same time, this challenging situation offers the potential for a powerful time of healing and deep personal reflection on who we are, where we have been, where we are heading. Due to the all-pervasive influence of social media, the internet, and the mainstream news, we're being inundated with a lot of information, lost in the media haze of spin, bogus reporting, and talking points, which reduce deep issues that affect both our day-to-day reality and our future to mere sound bites. It's become more and more difficult to discern the false from the true. Absolutely. Why don't we stop here for a second? So how is this time with the so-called pandemic and the lockdown, how has it impacted you?
Well, it's very interesting because I had, right before this, I just got to a stopping point of finishing an episode on my project, Quantum Qi.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was planning to go into retreat anyway, because I had been working really hard and really stressing myself out. And so it's given me this incredible opportunity to really go in and free myself of what I would call habitual patterns of thought, holding patterns in the body, emotional turmoil, patterns that have been part of my life since childhood, and really go deep in and reflect and use not only the teachings of Qi Gong, which I'm very absorbed in now, but all of the different traditions and teachings, healing, performing arts, etc., that I have been blessed to be a part of this entire life. So when I, for example, when I'm looking back into my childhood and the wounds that were that were part of my childhood, and particularly as a woman, the fact that I was so creative and bright from childhood, but it freaked people out. I was just like too much, and my voice got squashed, and that's why I love being on the stage. I felt really comfortable playing all these other roles. And the other thing was, as a child, as many women, I had to deal with this kind of Me Too situation. And that, on one level, was very painful. On the other, it gave me this ability to actually leave my body, my psyche to leave my body and travel in these other dimensions, which really was a great benefit in all my my performing, etc., an embodiment of deities and stories later on. So in this period, I've really been going into just bring up the shadows, we would call the shadow aspects of myself that were really causing me difficulties in my life, and to really feel them and release them. And then at the same time, bring in the things that brought me joy as a child. So I started ballet at 3. And now all of a sudden I find myself, spending time doing ballet bars, and doing modern dance and doing, and putting into my daily routine, which is about 3 hours, like at least an hour of walking out in the beauty of nature here in beautiful Crestone with the mountains, but also it's a whole mix now of the healing practices and the Qi Gong and the yoga and all of these things that I feel a clarity coming to my particularly emotional field and a spaciousness of my mind that I've experienced before, but never at this level of consistency. And then I've been spending time, of course, speaking on shows and working on different things that to help others, to help others go through this very difficult period. Now, I also have to say that very often I find myself, because I'm so sensitive, having to clear the fear that's being projected on us from the mainstream media. I mean, it is appalling at this point. It is such that it's very hard to, if you're watching the media, if you're obsessed with, if you're sitting at home and you're terrified and you're locked in your house and you're just watching like some of my family.
And by the way, they've done a very good job of locking us in our house and not giving us a whole lot of options to watch other things, since pro sports is off the table, live events are off the table. Really what we get is reruns, crap programming, and of course 24/7 coronavirus coverage. So they've done a really nice job of padding the cells while we're locked down in our own homes.
Oh, not only that, but if you watch regular television, it's commercial after commercial, fear, nonstop, And this is something I've written about and talked about for a long time, particularly for women, but it's for everyone. About, I'd call it the mass media merchandising machine. That is really projecting we're never good enough, we're never attractive enough, we're never smart enough. It's just the opposite of everything I'm about.
You and I had a really great conversation last night. Sharon and I were on the phone for about a half an hour, and I wish we could have even taped that conversation because it was so good. And one of the things we talked about was this idea around health and having a healthy body. And by the way, I'm not sharing this in any kind of a mean spirit or pejorative sense, but we talked about people that don't take care of their bodies, and that this is a time where we've got to be able to do that, because if we don't take care of our bodies, we're going to be susceptible to all this other crap that we're being inundated with on so many different levels. And one of the examples that I gave and I talked about with Emily on the Matrix Mash was Adele, who lost a bunch of weight. And she looks terrific, by the way, but you don't want to tell the people who are invested in her being overweight that she looks terrific, because they've got a real investment on her reflecting a particular body image back to them so they can feel okay about their body and see somebody that's successful and creative. But now that that's changed, it's created a crisis in this kind of anti-body identification world. And it's kind of fascinating to watch these things at play here. And they can't even wrap their heads around the fact that, hey, maybe she was pre-diabetic and she's lost some weight and it's healthier and better for her. All they want to do is hold on to the fact that don't tell her she looks better because she's lost some weight. She was already great before that happened. And you and I riffed about this a little bit last night, and I wish we could have just captured that conversation. But what are your thoughts on this? Because you obviously, by the way, Sharon's a Capricorn, and you're witnessing Capricorn before our very eyes getting younger. It's the Benjamin Button effect as we're getting older. But how do you weigh in on this kind of beauty, anti-beauty, health, anti-health dynamic, especially as it relates to women and body image?
Well, I wrote a book in 2003 called The Path of the Priestess, a guidebook for awakening the divine feminine. And in that book, I have a whole chapter on this, on the what the media, what the programming, not just the media, but for centuries has done to women and their perspective on body image, on feeling, on sensuality in particularly. I mean, many centuries ago, a woman who was, and I experienced this particularly growing up as a dancer. I was a classical dancer, but people referred to me as a exotic dancer, or
right, yeah.
Kind of connecting me with being a prostitute.
Right.
And so there became this whole perspective on women who really felt joy and bliss and sensuality and could stand out in the, in nature and really smell the flowers and feel the wind. And there was something wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult, and so I really just started looking at the history of what's happened to women, and also what's happened in the modern times, because yes, we have accomplished a lot, but what have we given up for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, um, I noticed when I looked at women going, and now it's even more intense with the corona, women who gave up having a family to
Mm-hmm.
go into the corporate world. And I found that instead of bringing the feminine aspects of nurturing, of really opening and perceiving energy
Mm-hmm.
and holding what I call the psychic energetic
Mm-hmm.
emotional landscape of
Right.
society.
Right.
Because in the ancient societies, women were the healers. They'd ushered in life and death, and
Uh-huh.
they even were the mediators.
Mm-hmm.
And now, when women are they were coming. This was sort of 2000, around then, when they were coming full force into the world of corporate.
Mm-hmm.
They were giving that up to be harder than men, to be,
Right.
and even treating women worse than the men were treating them, because they were in competition.
Right.
And this is, I really think that's shifting now. But what happened, what I'm observing with women in their 70s particularly, who just fell for that, and now they're alone,
Mm.
and they're locked in their apartments, and they had no children,
Mm-hmm.
and they're terrified,
Mm-hmm.
and they're terrified to go out. I mean, because in many ways the government has been their husband,
Mm-hmm.
and they're
Yeah.
looking to the government to um, help them, to heal them, to
Right. To keep
protect
them
them.
secure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, that's unfortunate. I've seen a few cases of that myself. And there was this idea, Jordan Peterson talks a bit about this, that there was this idea that women could come into the corporate setting and theoretically humanize the corporate setting. Like some of the values that were associated with being kinder, nurturing, gentler, they would be grafted onto the corporate soul. But the exact opposite happened in many cases, and that the women who entered into that arena had to take the sacrament of the psychopath and become even more tyrannical than the men that they were up against in order to not only meet them but kind of go next level. So they, in many cases, they were assimilated by the psychopathic Borg system. And but I think what's interesting now is we're seeing these corporations espouse these so-called these virtues or these values that they care about us. And I think it's a bunch of horse shit, because really all they want to do is get us to cozy up to this new model of governance control where the corporations have moved into this de facto kind of Aquarian parent versus this Capricornian parent. So in a weird way, they've taken the feminine animus, right? The spirit of the feminine, grafted it as kind of a marketing angle, but kept a lot of the psychopathic or sociopathic trappings. It just has a different face and a different mask now.
For sure. We talked about this last night. I've noticed not every woman governor or mayor.
Right.
The one of
Right.
South Dakota, she's different, but
Yeah.
I'm seeing where the women are more dictatorial in many cases than the men. They're scared. And I think what they're afraid of is taking the responsibility. They would rather keep people locked up than having the chance that if they let them out, things might, and I'll say might, get worse in terms of more people dying.
Mm-hmm.
Men are much more, they'll go out and take risks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
what we love about men.
Yeah.
Men are
Yeah.
just like, I've been looking a lot lately at these relationships because it's very much up, male and female relationships. And men are they just go for it. They're linear. They want to solve a problem right away. Where
Mm-hmm.
women like to just sit back and reflect.
I
mean, this is generalization.
Feel into it. They want to feel into the situation.
Yeah, and take a bit of time. So that's why I see many of these women are not doing that. They're acting more, in many ways, more aggressive than men.
Right.
And it's disturbing to me because I really feel that we all, especially now, need nurturing. And I think that's partly why I call the subtitle of my series, Quantum Qi, is the Taoist art of nurturing life.
Yeah. The nurturing aspect is something that's, I mean, I feel like it's really been obfuscated and lost. And I'm going to step out on a limb here a little bit. I think the millennial generation has had some pretty intense challenges in a lot of ways. And what I've seen from their very potent expression from the kind of the feminine side, not all, by the way, I don't want to put everybody into a bucket, but you look at these certain kinds of expressions, like you have kind of this, kind of vulgar slut culture, that comes out of this sort of like, fuck you, I'm a slut, I'll be able to do whatever I want with my body. Right. Whoops, I swore. I said I wouldn't swear for a week. All right. And then you have this other kind of model, which is like the body model, which is I'm just going to let my body be whatever it wants. And I'm going to, and I don't care if I, theoretically am healthy or how I look for the rest of the world. So you have these really intense extremes, right? One is but they're both saying I'm going to do whatever I want with my body or not. But what is not in there is, and again, I don't want to make a big sort of overarching generalization, but what's not in there is the nurturing part, right? The nurturing piece, the coming together, and this blending of this intense kind of yang and this very, very inward turning into the yin, sort of the big yin, right? But there's no balance and no nurturing, and I think that's what you're speaking to a little bit here.
Oh, for sure. I do have to say that one of the we would call positive things in my family, there were 5 babies born in the last year.
Wow.
And yeah, and this is and I'm a grandmother finally.
Nice.
And this is really interesting because it's being locked down like this, the fathers are having the opportunity to spend time and see when the child first sits up or crawls or walks or speaks.
Right.
And so in many ways, that's going to help bring a balanced situation to the child and to the family. Hopefully this won't last a long time, because isolating children and isolating families is very disturbing.
It's very disturbing.
I could not believe when I saw pictures in Thailand of they're putting these they look like motorcycle masks on babies as soon as they're born.
Oh no.
So how are they going to connect? They'll be behind a screen. They're isolating.
Yeah.
And now they're talking about some places, we're not going to, until we have the vaccine, we can't go back, have the kids back to school. But there aren't even that many kids that are getting this.
Right.
So there's something very odd going on.
Absolutely.
That is, I call it social engineering. I mean, I've been waiting. Well, I'm married to Jay, so imagine what I hear. It's like I've had to.
I can only imagine what it'd be like to live with Jay. My God.
It's like really constantly.
You're getting the download 24/7.
Oh, it's like what new sci-fi movie am I in today?
Yeah.
Every morning it's like, whether it's they're going to put CRISPR in the vaccines and right. We're all going to live to, if we can make it, we're going to live to hundreds of years old. And, the next day it's some other bizarre situation. So, I mean, it's really helped me to find a way to stay centered.
Yeah.
And especially when all this confusion and chaos and emotional turmoil in the world is coming at me. And once again, I have to say, I've done a lot of deep practices from the Tibetan tradition, the Hindu tradition, ancient Egypt, and all that. But I have found that these Qi Gong practices, it's interesting for that to be what I'm working on now, because what's happening with China
Mm-hmm.
is really they're our adversary now. And I've been reading a lot about the period from when the Japanese, so early 1900s, through the nationalists, through Mao and the Cultural Revolution, and what those poor Chinese people have gone through. They have no freedom of expression.
Right.
They have the social credit system.
Mm-hmm.
I met some people, some friends of mine have a daughter they adopted her from China, and now she's in college, and she was in college in Beijing. And so I saw her and her boyfriend, and I said, well, how do you feel about the social credit system? And they went, oh, we're good citizens.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, and I'm very concerned about that, bringing that here. I mean, we see with this.
It's already here. It's already here.
Yeah. The woman who, the salon owner in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
that judge, when I watched that, it was like watching the films, the very few films. It's interesting where you don't, they'll go Hitler, 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 but you hardly see the horror that was perpetrated upon the Chinese people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that judge it was just like out of one of those courts, of what they did in China or in Stalin's area, where she was supposed to do an act of contrition.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm bowing down to you, the great, patriarchal leader, and I can't speak my mind. And she didn't. And then look what's happening. How much has she raised now?
Well, close to $500,000, I think.
Yeah.
And we talked about this last night. That was like the worst thing that judge could have ever done.
Yeah.
And he was a robot. He was playing by a script because he thought that he thought that she would grovel. Like that was his level of arrogance.
Yeah.
And when she didn't do that just completely blew up his script. And I watched her last night on Sean Hannity, which is a very emotional, very touched, in slightly traumatized woman who went from somebody who just wanted to open her salon to being thrust into this national spotlight. I mean, it's kind of been, I think, overwhelming for her, but people are supporting this woman and other women like her who have said no to the Sanhedrin. I mean, that guy was the freaking Sanhedrin. Am I right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly who he was.
Oh, he was. And it's also, when I watched her, it's though she felt she received what every woman and every man wants: support, like huge support for speaking her truth.
Yes, absolutely. And I just watched her when she was released from jail, and they were talking to her, and she didn't have any makeup on, and you could tell she was stressed out, and the emotion she was channeling was profound.
Yes.
Really profound. I won't even try to articulate it. It would be doing a disservice. Let's jump into Qi Gong here. We got a couple of videos that we've queued up, and let's talk about your relationship with this fantastic art form of energy, acquainting the body with the Qi force and the Qi energy. When did you start to get into it? And where are you now with the relationship with Qi Gong?
Jay and I had made a film, our only feature film, because we're documentarians,
right?
Called The Last Avatar, and it's a real culty film. and in that, Neil Donald Walsh plays the Count Saint Germain, and he introduces the concept of the light body, and in a simple way. And I had been doing the practice from the Tibetan tradition, the Dzogchen, great perfection tradition, since '85, and looked at it and did practices from many traditions. So I wanted to do a documentary that would go deep. And so I wanted to interview Master Chia, who is
I've interviewed him. He's a trip. I like him.
Oh, he just always makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And so I went to a conference in Lenox, Massachusetts, to interview him. And the owner, a beautiful woman named Ying, said, well, you're here. I have this whole conference going on Qi Gong and Tai Chi and medical aspects. And so why don't you interview everyone? And I'm like, my dance tradition is improvisational, and I'm really into spontaneity.
Right.
So even though I knew a bit about Mantak Chia's work, and I knew a lot about energy. So I said, okay, I just went for it. And these teachers, it was all in nature, which is not that easy to do as a filmmaker.
Right.
You're dealing with wind and rain, all kinds of stuff. But they transmitted so much light and energy and upliftment to me that I was just kind of blown away by it.
Yeah.
And I came back and I just felt like the Tao had chosen me with all my background to do this. And so I already had 12 interviews. And so the last few years, I've just been going deeper and deeper and deeper. And at that moment when I first met Master Chia is when I began the practice itself. And having done all this dance from all over the world, and then also yoga since the late 60s, actually, I found this to be this incredible adjunct to everything that I had done. And the first one that really gave this ancient, well, yoga too, but it's really about bringing in the Qi, feeling the life force, and taking your energy and your life in your own hands.
Literally in your own hands.
Literally your own hands.
Yeah.
And helping you to ground. So many are now, I want to ascend. And it's like, if you look at all these ancient, many of them, particularly Hindu, Tibetan, and definitely the Taoist, the body is the precious vehicle. You don't just like go off somewhere. It's through understanding the body. It's through total embodiment and the fullness of who you are that will help you achieve these higher levels of beingness that really are already a part of you. They've just been clouded.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard me talk about Aurobindo earlier in the conversation. Did you catch that?
No.
So I was talking a little bit about Aurobindo, and he's one of these spiritual teachers that was very into the body, right? That the body was the vehicle of transformation. And he, they're all involved in some level of transcendentalism, but he was the one that was really rooted into the biology, the chemistry, the energy of the body. So if anybody wants to dive into somebody who's kind of fascinated in that world, check out Aurobindo, check out the Mother, and check out Sat Prem. Those are three very unique, very enlightened individuals that have some. In fact, Michael Murphy from Esalen was like a devotee of Aurobindo and tried to replicate or further his work. Okay, let's talk about these two videos. I got queued up. I got number one queued up. What do you want to? Let me just put it up on the screen here so you know which one I'm referring to. What do you want to say about this one before I hit play?
This is the description. Yes, this is an overview of the work we're doing. What's been really exciting technologically, and again, these things happen spontaneously. One day I was in our little coffee shop here in Crestone, and a woman was introduced to me, a young woman, and she said, "Oh, I'm really interested in Qi Gong." And I said, "Oh, that's great." She says, "Yes, and my husband is an aerial drone photographer." And I'm like, "Really? Well, how would you like to come with me to a teaching?" I was going to a teaching of one of the, who's become my teacher, Master Li Junfeng, who had been a martial arts film star, and he had been the coach of the award-winning Beijing Wushu team. And then he went into what's called Shenzhen meditation, which is all about opening the heart. Beautiful, beautiful movements. And he was teaching not too far. So they came with me. And that's when I began working with drones in nature. So you'll see that. And also, I had worked with animation and special effects actually from the first time was in New York when I was working on music video in the late 80s. And then I started, now, you know, the technology is such that it's still not cheap, but there are programs that you can do some really amazing things with. So in this, you'll see some of that from a technological viewpoint. And then also, you know, it's just a description of where we're going, you know, my dream of this project.
So this is the first of 2 videos, and this is shot in Colorado. Is that correct?
No, it's all over the world. I mean,
all over the world. All right.
That picture is in front of my house, actually, this picture. And that's my dear beloved Amlia Weiching, who's an extraordinary healer. She's an associate producer.
All right, let's hit play and let's take a little journey here.
I'm Sharron Rose. We invite you to join the Sharon He is the thread that weaves together each episode will explore the science and practices of Qi Gong, Tai Chi, acupuncture, and Taoism, spoken by masters and scholars. In the Taoist vision, negative energy and positive energy is energy. They are both forces introducing quantum physicists and medical professionals to expand upon these concepts. We're learning physical physical education, quantum physics, high vibrational. It's no longer just a posture, just a movement, just a spirit, but also a matter of the internal power and shift. Quantum Qi will also include simple practice. Drunk and march into the breath, into a truth, into a peace, feeling ground, in your feet. You are designed to feel good. When you're feeling stress or there's pain or tension in your body, these are messages to make some changes. We do know that 75 to 85% of all disease is preventable. A unique aspect of quantum Qi is the use of aerial drones for the capacity to coordinate arms to soothing technology. If you love nature, bring open space. No nature shows Qi is foot. The Qi visionary animations educate people about Qi, the quantum field, the energy bodies beyond the physical, and more. Do you have different pathways that energy moves in order to exchange? Like someone said, I'm a fisher. I can do it. Yes, everybody can do it. You can practice many others. The sense of self-confidence when we find ourselves to become willing.
Wow, that is really incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So beautiful to look at. And wow. So I have two thoughts besides the beautiful part. That little 3-minute clip is like an act of alchemy in and of itself.
That's filmmaking.
So
at the highest level.
So yeah. Well, I mean, so number one, you use drones, right?
Yeah.
And so what have we seen drones lately rolled out as?
The
These
same drones.
these evil, these absolutely evil, robo watchdogs that are being employed by 20 states across the country, including New Jersey, telling people that they have to move apart from one another, right?
It's interesting because I was thinking about that, and it's the DJI that I'm using, right?
Uh-huh.
And I'm thinking, oh, well, if they're, if they have some kind of little chip that brings everything back to China.
You're bringing them back to Qi.
That's right. Because, in China, you cannot even type the word gong into a computer. This is their heritage. I showed episode 1 to a bunch of college kids.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, this Chinese girl, she was crying. And she said to me, they took my heritage from me.
Yeah.
And you're bringing it back. And I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other part of the little clip. I mean, there's a great deal of anti-China rhetoric. And I think that there on some level kind of needs to be. Like, I think the corporate China, communist China, the Borg mind that's overrun these people and their culture needs a very hard critical assessment and reset. But now we have this other piece here, which is the redemption of that in some ways. This is humanizing, this superstructure that we're now engaged in this polaric kind of battle with. And so just that 3-minute clip alone is pure alchemy.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's interesting because my son went to Waldorf school, and
Mm-hmm.
there they don't want children to watch TV or any of this until
Right.
6th grade, because they say it hurts your creative expression. But I always would say to them, it's not the technology, it's the way it's being used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always had a question for people that have kids that go to Waldorf school. Do they serve Waldorf salad at the Waldorf school?
No,
No,
no, they don't.
Why is that? You think they'd have a Waldorf salad day at the Waldorf school?
I don't know. It's a great system. I mean,
Sure.
The kids, even those ones that they didn't learn computers until like 10th grade, but some of them became computer programmers because they had this creative expression that hadn't been filtered through, and they came fresh.
Yep.
And also very, it's like classical European education, very open, very, when they learn to to write, first they learn to make their own crayons.
Oh, wow.
Things like that,
I got one more clip here. This is, if I can fire it up, give me a second. Where are we? Let's see. This is trailer 2, from subtle arts to martial arts. What do you want to share about this?
Well, martial arts, people know martial arts from Bruce Lee, from all the kung fu movies,
Mm-hmm.
but really the core of all martial arts, which we bring forth, is the healing aspect of Qi Gong. Like, unless many people say, unless you've really done Qi Gong and really because it teaches you to understand and work with your own energy field. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you get to the Tai Chi, which is the more of a martial form, you're learning how to encounter the other and work with the other. It's still gentle and soft, but it's like, when somebody's coming at you, you learn how to sort of let it go.
Mm-hmm.
What do they call it? Let the monkey out the back door, right? And then you get to, the hard styles, hard in terms of, energetic kung fu, but still, what's the basis? Centeredness,
Mm-hmm.
grounded, really learning how to feel the Qi and direct it in a positive way.
Right. Long time ago, I was really sick, like flu, whatever kind of sick. And I wound up sleeping one time for about, 13 or 14 hours. It was how down. But during that night where I slept so intensely, I had this dream. It was like the most intense dream I ever had. And I was involved in a psychic war with an incredibly powerful warlock. like with the embodiment of not just a warlock, but a demon possessed warlock. And I was trying to fight, and I knew what I was doing on some level, but I was getting just wiped out. And it was a very intense, beyond a dream. He was ready to just level me. And then at that point, I just surrendered. I just let go. And then everything just washed over me. And then he was gone. And it was really, I had had a dream like that again. Not sure I want to, by the way, but that speaks to this idea of getting out of the way, or letting that energy just go past you in some ways, or ushering it all the way through.
Yeah, but that's where you have to really learn to stand your ground. And that's what's so powerful about these teachings.
All right, let's get into this, from subtle arts to martial arts.
Martial arts includes all the combative arts like karate, judo, Chinese kung fu, or Chinese boxing, which are combative form of fighting, the art of expressing the human life. The beauty of the Qi cultivation practices is that you can have it any time. The Qi and Qi Gong is obvious because it says Qi work. The Tai Chi and Kung Fu is still Qi work, it's just called something else. Qi Gong is still the energetic core of Tai Chi. It's still a delivering power in effect. It's not that different from what is required to move Qi within the body for self-healing. When you master Qi and start physical activity, you move the Qi Gong, and something body energy becomes consciously active. So through practice, you feel in your heart and your whole body full of love, full of Qi. All the history of the martial arts, it came out of the need to protect yourself, to protect your property, your family from being abused by someone else who was overpowering your fortune. It was a force of harming you. The best way is to find a way. But your life is that you need to know how to hold them up. That there's a physical protection, there's a mental protection, and there's a spiritual protection. Most of us in modern life don't have aggressive attachment. Most of our martial battles, our emotions, are against stress, finance, money, our own internal voices in our head. So how do we stay protected against those attacks? The best way to protect yourself in a martial situation is to master relaxation and presence. And it's very difficult for somebody to harm you. To be a quantum warrior, a warrior of the Tao, we have to be brave enough to enter into unknown parts of ourselves and to bring forth places of power and the places of power that we can transform into life. The essence of martial arts is not to be aggressive. It is to be secure in yourself so you don't have to fight against others. Martial arts actually, when you start dealing with energy, you want to know, can I hurt somebody? When you expand and grow in love, can I help somebody? Can I
Awesome stuff.
Thank you.
Really beautiful. So where are you now with the project?
Hmm. Let's see. I'm beginning to reach out. I'm at the end of working on the first couple episodes. I'm beginning to reach out to distributors and sales agents, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in this kind of place of just reflecting on where I want to go. I have other projects where I'd want to, one envisioned where I want to talk about many of the same ideas about energy and the nature of emotions, etc., from many different perspectives, from different healing traditions, from different spiritual traditions. So I'm really sitting back and reflecting upon, what I really want to do, what is, and a lot of it for me at this time in my life, it's about having the opportunity to work with other other creatives, young people who have talent, and to really help open their consciousness and creative gifts. The animations, really came to a level. It didn't. The animator is very talented, and I said, oh, I want this to look like ancient Chinese watercolor paintings. So we went through these programs and did a lot of work to come to this vision that I have that pays respect to the tradition.
Right. By the way, I really think that from an astrological perspective, a lot of the millennials, in fact, most of them have Pluto and Scorpio in their chart. And Scorpio is a sign that really deals with deep energetics, magnetism, anti-magnetism, regeneration. So Qi Gong, Tai Chi, I really feels like this would be just a natural fit for the millennial generation and allow them to really coalesce their theoretical power.
Oh, it would be amazing. Whenever I've shown the first episode, immediately people want to do it. So that's part of our vision, is to have classes available for people online or in person. Say online now. That's always been my vision. Was each episode's about 35 to 40 minutes, and then to have another 20 minutes of exercises that bring the teachings encoded in each of the episodes to life, so you can feel them, after you've heard about them and see the teachers doing them, then you actually can experience, because that for me is what it's all about. And I feel that that's really what's needed. In this time, there's all this fear about our health, but this would be an incredible time for these teachings to come out, so that people can really learn to take care of themselves. And they're so simple. I just don't understand. I'm reading, you read this stuff now where, oh, Ayurveda, oh, Qi Gong, these are traditions thousands of years long that have been time tested. Like Roger Yonka, who's another associate producer, he's worked with the Mayo Clinic and the Veterans Administration and Kaiser Permanente to bring these teachings in. Dr. Effie Chow, she's the older woman that pulled the sword. She was,
that was impressive, by the way, man. You could tell that she's intense.
She is intense. She was on Clinton's alternative health board when they were, in office, and it's been tested. And so I don't understand really why there are all of these articles. It's like, okay, the only thing you can do now is listen to us and take a pill, and that pill, you don't have to do any work.
Well, we know why. We know why.
Pill.
Yeah. Because it takes away from any kind of autonomy, sovereignty, responsibility, transformation, all those things that are associated with putting an effort forth in one's life. How's it changed your life, Sharon, your practice?
Oof. Well, it really, if you can imagine distilling the wisdom of 30 masters, it put me through a real inner, all the shadow. It would be like, I'd go and interview people, and it was like, I could see the next level of openness, and then the shadow creeped in, right? And I'd be it was like emotional tornadoes, like parts of myself wanting to be free. And so it wasn't easy, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do have to say that I had a reading with you in January that was phenomenal and really, as I should say this, that my sun is 25 Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
So that this Pluto-Saturn conjunction that's affecting everyone is definitely affecting me.
Mm-hmm.
And your wisdom has really helped me. And and during this period, I'm really coming into, as I said in the beginning, deep inner reflection, freeing myself from these patterns, physical, emotional, mental,
Mm-hmm.
seeing the connections between them,
Mm-hmm.
and using these practices
Mm-hmm.
to really free myself. So also, one of the beautiful things, one of the things that attracted me about Qi Gong is that as a ballet dancer from childhood, the grace of the movement, just it's like the same flow that I found in romantic ballet as a child.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that concept of flow, which
Mhm.
is just essential to these practices. Not only a flow of the movement, it's the flow of your consciousness, the flow of your emotions. And also, I really, Master Chia and some of the teacher, they're always talking about smiling love into your heart,
Mhm.
smiling love into your organs, smiling love into your whole being. And really, we have to start with ourselves. We have to start to free ourselves from that programming and find that essential love and freedom,
Mhm.
ability to speak without fear
Mhm. Yes.
in
Yes.
ourselves. And so the inner reflective time is, I'm hoping to, be a positive for people. And I'm seeing it around me.
Mhm.
And it seems that more people are waking up to these machinations, and we'll see how it unfolds.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. So we really seem to be in this reset period. People have different definitions of what that is, but it definitely seems like a reset. And it feels to me like we've been in a very deep inhalation phase, right? These last 3 months, the final degrees of the true node in Cancer, deep inhalation. And when those nodes shift at the end of the month, we're going to be moving into an exhalation phase as they go into Gemini, which rules the lungs. So take it all in right now, because we're going to be moving into exhalation, and it's going to be a very different cycle coming up. Let's bring Steve back in. Steve, why don't you come on in and join us? And Steve, you ever do any martial arts? Did you ever do any kung fu?
No martial arts. I mean, yoga, but that's about it. That's about
Yeah.
it.
You ever
But
play with Tai Chi or Qi Gong or anything like that?
just a little bit, but never. I know in Winter Park they used to have a qigong class, but I never made it to that. But everybody in the chat room is loving Sharon, and we're basking in your love and radiance, and it's an honor to have you here. Go ahead.
No, I just saying that was amazing.
Yeah.
Those clips were awesome, weren't they?
Yep. Very nice.
Yeah.
I'm wondering too, because this is a time of reorientation, and you touched on the importance of grounding in the body, and so many of us were caught up in our thinking mind, and everything's external, and so your practices help bring the energy back to the internal, right? And I would like to hear your thoughts on the importance of orienting to the inner world to help be better in the outer world. How that increases your state and helps things.
Well, let's see. About 20 years ago, I was talking with my Tibetan teacher, Namkhai Norbu, and he said to me, he looked at me, he goes, inner, outer, there's no difference. And so what's happening in the outer world is a reflection of who you are. So the symbol of this is the mirror and the reflection. And the goal is to become like the mirror, so that whatever manifests before you you're not disturbed. You just allow it to be. And it's interesting because in many of these teachings, the human experience is about the what we might call negative. One aspect of it is about desire, right? Human beings have desire. And then the transformation of that is discernment. And so when we're in a situation where we feel this energy coming at us, it can even be the tone of voice of someone. It could be even aggressive behavior. It's like, take a breath, take a step back, and instead of engaging, observe. And just be that mirror. It's not an easy thing to do.
It's not easy. It's not. Yeah.
A lot of practice.
It takes practice. Yeah.
But after you said it, we don't have to engage in everything. We can let things be.
Because in many cases, it's their problem. It's not yours. And the best thing you can do is to not engage and just allow their energy to manifest. And if you don't engage, sooner or later, they might keep trying to, get you to engage, get you to yell at them, get in a fight. But if you don't, sooner or later, they're just going to burn out. It reminds me when my son was, going through the terrible twos. I just let him cry, and then I would nurse him. It's there's so much. If you can imagine that in your heart, there is this light, brilliant light that represents your essential self, that never has been tainted beyond all this stuff. And that it's like the light of a movie projector, so that when the movie projector is turned on, your essential being and all your karma is just displayed all around you. Right?
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah.
Everything that you see and experience is your karma, so that you can observe it and work with it and come back to that essential place in yourself.
Right. Wonderful.
Steve, I think Qi Gong can be great for you with your body work stuff. Right. I think if you spend a little time in the Qi Gong universe, I bet your body work can just go to a whole new level.
That's right. It'd be a great compliment to it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that people who are yoga, actually my yoga teacher that I had in Boulder, he was incorporating Qi Gong. Well, he was a Iyengar yoga teacher with all the props, but he started incorporating Qi Gong and the Feldenkrais technique that I was talking about early. And his students are just advancing very quickly, and more people who do yoga. That's what I'm very interested now. We've been so fortunate, and hopefully will continue to be privy to all of these teachings from so many traditions. And now how can we find a way to weave that, take the best of everything, whatever it is that we personally feel attracted to help bring us to a new level of health and prosperity.
Yeah. And so, these are the proving grounds now, because we're going to need this stuff, right? We've been R&Ding this since the 60s, really, in a lot of ways. So we got to put it all together now, because it's game time, it's showtime. And we're going to need all of our tools at our disposal. So
yeah, I think about it as a recipe. You take the best ingredients and you blend them in our new way and culturize it. We're putting together this new culture for the new world, our new world, to transcend what's being offered to us. And Sharon, I think you're on the cutting edge of that. So
thank you. Yeah, that's why you could see that I have people of all different cultures all different ethnicities.
Was there an Aboriginal guy in there? Was
He's, that's Kiara Windrider. He does look Aboriginal. He's South Indian.
okay. Yeah, he looked a little Aboriginal. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do we have anything from Chatlandia, Steve, or are they just quiet
Like
with
I said, they were just bathing,
appreciation?
in the beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. A thought I'd just like to say too that a lot of us aren't watching TV, but these rumblings of war with China and all that, we've come so far as humanity about coming together with love. We don't even need to go down that route. Not let them go down that route. We need to put it together the way we know how is best and just live it. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, I completely agree. There's a real difference between the leaders, the politicians in the corporate world of any country and the people themselves. And the Chinese people, my heart breaks for them, because having studied even prior to all, the communists, it was such a strange, beautiful in the artistic sense, but a strange culture, that was, the parents were raising their young children. Their dream was for them to become concubines or eunuchs. And so I feel the Chinese people have been really put through a tremendous amount of programming and just suffering. I mean, we all have, if you any history, you read that people have been so much war, so much suffering. And my dream for humanity is that we can grow up, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
move to a different level of perception of ourselves and each other, and really, really, really heal, because humanity has been traumatized.
Yeah. We've all played our roles, but we need to keep our eye on the prize going forward.
And in the famous words of Lenny Kravitz, "Let love rule." Right. So why don't we wrap this up right there? Sharon, where can people find more about you and your stellar work?
You could go to quantumqimovie.com. So QUANTUMQI movie.com. I have a Facebook, facebook.com/quantumqi. I have a very active group you can find on Facebook, Quantum Qi Life Force Energy, where I have teachers from all over the world now giving exercises. And then of course sacredmysteries.com. That's the company that Jay and I put together starting in 2000, and that has information about the films we've done in the past. And Gaia also has a lot of our films from the past.
Yeah, I'll make sure I have some links in the show page so people can go and check you out and get some more info. Yeah, well, thank you, Sharon, for being here.
What a pleasure.
Yeah.
What a pleasure. As I go into Saturn sitting on my sun for
I know. This is it.
next 3 months.
Yeah, showtime for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Gonna stretch, you're gonna grow. We'll see you down the line, and say hi to Jay.
I certainly shall.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
So, hey, great show, huh?
Feel good show. Both of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Both very positive, uplifting people. Tonic for our Friday, tonic for our times. Most certainly.
Very nice.
And thanks for being here, Steve, and helping bring Sayer and Sharon into the show. We'll be back on Sunday night Astro Live. Before we sign off, a good friend of mine, Jolie Evans, aka the Aspen Psychic, is running a very sweet deal. If anybody wants to get a quote unquote reading, she is not a tarot reader. She practices something called Lenormand, which is a system using a different set of cards. But she's very talented. You can find her on Facebook, the Aspen Psychic. She has an Instagram page. So go check her out. She's running kind of a little special here for the coming week. And I just want to put a plug in with her. She's a good friend, and she's a very, very, very generous and accurate intuitive. So I just want to let people know about that as well. Got anything you want to share or add before we sign off today?
Nope. Feels good.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll be back on Sunday nights. Again, I want to thank Sarah G. I want to thank Sharron Rose and Chatlandia. God bless everybody else out there who's watching. Hang in there. We're going to get through this. Yeah.
Yeah. What about next Friday?
Oh, thank you for the reminder. We will be off next Friday. I will be off next Friday because I'm moving, and Friday is my move day. So there won't be a show on Friday. I got to get everything set up into the new home and the new studio. But and that's the only day I think we're going to miss is Friday. So this week, 15 Minutes of Flame, back online, Sunday Night Live. We're just going to have a gap on Friday. Thanks for the reminder, Steve.
Got it.
Appreciate it. All right.
Take care.
Yeah, take care. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say it when it's possible. If you'd like to subscribe, there's a link in the show page. Thank you, everybody who has been subscribing. We're going to continue to build up our media presence and get great guests and great information. And you get this 6 out of 7 days of the week. Bye for now. Have a great weekend.